Brian Lehrer on WNYC, live in the green space today. Quick reminder that we'll have our national call-in show for Trump's first 100 days tonight at 8 o'clock. My guests will be April Ryan, White House correspondent from the American Urban Radio Networks, and then Michael Moore on how he sees Trump keeping his promises or not to his white working class base. Indivisible tonight at 8 here on WNYC and across the country on day 89. One signature of the Trump administration is not just the number of people his election has spurred to take to the streets in protest, but who they are. Women, also known as half the population. People who want to see the president's tax returns, something all presidents since the 1970s have released. And now, scientists and people who care about science. Yes, scientists around the world are leaving their labs to march in favor of facts and evidence. Big marches are planned for this Saturday, April 22nd, Earth Day. One of the organizers of the Earth Day March for Science joins us now, Brooklyn's own Ayana Elizabeth Johnson, who is a marine biologist and now activist. Dr. Johnson, welcome to WNYC and the Green Space.
Thank you for having me.
So what's happening on Saturday?
So on Saturday, we march for science. This is something I never thought I would be doing, helping to organize a march for science. As someone who has marched in the Women's March for Black Lives Matter, thinking about how we care for immigrants in this country, I never thought I would have to organize something about facts and the scientific method and the value of science in society and the role it really should be playing in policymaking that's based on evidence instead of opinion and conjecture. So we have marches in 514 cities around the world. Thank you. It's really exciting that this has become an international movement because it's not just in the U.S. that we're seeing this problem of science being sidelined in the policymaking process. And we have about 250 partner organizations from scientific societies to nonprofits to museums and aquariums, which are so important as the interface between science and the public. So we're really excited about the fact that this is an extremely broad and diverse coalition, social science, natural science, and we're talking about biologists, physicists, chemists, but also, social science, so economics and sociology, anthropology, archaeology, everything about how we understand the world, what humans are doing to it, and then how we can use that information to make good decisions that keep us safe and healthy and all of that good stuff. And
listeners, we can take a few phone calls for Dr. Ayana Elizabeth Johnson at 212-433-WNYC, 212-433-9692 on the coming March for Science this Saturday. And those of you in the green space, you can raise your hand if you want to ask a question. You said something interesting in that answer about the rest of the, well, you said a lot interesting in that answer, but something in particular about the rest.
I want to bore you in the first minute.
About the rest of the world, that this isn't the only country where this is going on. And I think Americans who care about science might, in general, have the impression that we are kind of uniquely subject to religious ideologues who push back against science and corporate interests who push back against science for their purposes, that this doesn't happen in these ways so much elsewhere. Did you have any particular examples in mind?
I wish I did. We were talking with one of the organizers of the march in Berlin, and he had some great examples of things that were happening in Europe. So I'm sure Science March Berlin's social media feed would be a good place to look. But I think in general, the challenge that underlies that broader issue that you brought out is actually the problem of, is science interesting, right? So we can laugh about it, but because scientists have not done a great job of explaining the value of their work to the public, that's how we've gotten ourselves in this pickle where people feel like they can just ignore science and evidence in favor of their opinions. And so the March for Science is really excited about helping to push for scientific literacy and helping to break down that wall between scientists and the public, not have science be this thing that happens somewhere in a lab. Most science doesn't even happen in labs. So breaking down that wall, helping to explain why science is so important to our health and well-being. So that's why this march is not just a moment, but really the start of this movement to help reestablish science in the place that we think it needs to be.
How much do you think the Trump administration is really against science versus how much do you think you just have policy differences based on what the proper response is to the data?
When government data sets start disappearing from federal websites, it's not a difference of opinion. When scientists are being censored and not allowed to talk about the results of their research, that's not an opinion. That's like suppressing evidence that should be used to make sure our drinking water is safe and our air is clean and our food is healthy and not poisonous. That our cell phones work, that our data is secure, that our bridges don't collapse, that our medicine can heal us. I mean, I think the problem is that we forget how valuable science is in our daily lives. It seems like something that only comes up once in a while as like a, did you learn this fun fact from science today? But really it's something that's pervasive and needs to be appreciated as something much more foundational.
You've written that you, quote, have a crush on the scientific method. Do you want to share what it is and what you love about it?
Oh my gosh, yes, that is an accurate quote. I love how elegant it is and how clear it is. It's this extremely rational process for coming up with an idea, a question, a hypothesis, doing an experiment to see whether or not it stands up to experimentation, taking that first result and then saying, can I get this result again? Or is this an outlier? Is this aberrant? And then can other scientists also repeat it? In what scenarios does this hypothesis hold true? And so through this process of the scientific method, we can learn amazing things about what's actually happening in the world. And it just seems so foolish to me that we would not make use of this opportunity to have a factual basis for policymaking.
Let's take a question from here in the green space. Hi there.
Hi there. Good morning. I'm just wondering, in this, quote unquote, age of ignorance that we're living in, where facts and figures and knowledge seems to be kind of a afterthought, how do we get people to really get involved and pay more attention to things like climate change and all of these agencies that seem to be, the dismantling is the modus operandi of this administration? Does that make sense?
How do we get people to pay attention?
Yes.
Well, step one, everyone go march on Saturday. I mean, that's a big reason why we're doing this. It's not because like we need to count our steps and our apps or whatever so that we can get our points. It's because we really need to show our numbers in standing up for science. One of the hashtags we're using is science, not silence. So making sure that scientists and science advocates are really starting to talk about all this stuff. The official hashtag is also March for Science. But I think having the March for Science is this moment to have attention. And obviously it's really important to figure out how to sustain that conversation. And there are lots of ways that science and the scientific community can be better, obviously at communicating, but also about being more inclusive, doing research that the public that is more useful to the public, that is more exciting to the public, finding creative new ways to convey that. And all of those are things that are part of our longer term plan as well.
And I see that you're a member of the March's diversity team, and that there was some pushback early on over the idea of inclusionary language and the idea of data-driven science. Where did you land?
Oh, our whole team wholeheartedly embraces the value of diversity, inclusion in science. The pushback really was from outside people, outside scientists not involved with the march, who said, this is a distraction. Just talk about science. And our response was, who do you think does science? It's humans. So the fact that I'm a black woman from Brooklyn doing marine biology actually matters, and that my father is Jamaican really does matter. Your history matters in terms of what science you do. So I do science that's focused on sustainable fishing in Caribbean fishing communities and how to make sure that the views of fishermen are incorporated into management. That's based on science, but also community concerns and priorities. And someone who doesn't have the same background as me might not be interested in that research, might not be asking those same questions. So who does science, who gets funded to do science, who has access to good science education, all informs what science is done and what communities are served by that science. So another part of what the March for Science is going to be doing in the longer term is really pushing for scientific literacy and scientific education. So kids in the Bronx and Kansas have great science educations and have the same opportunities and exposures so that they can grow up and be the next generation of scientists asking the questions, doing the research that their communities need.
And you included social science earlier on your list of things that it's important to protect. You know that social science has been used at times in the past to reinforce prejudice. So is it sort of in a morally different category from physical sciences like marine biology?
No, I mean, medical science also has a really storied history of experimenting on marginalized peoples in a way that's just horrific, whether it's like forced sterilizations or giving people STDs on purpose to see what happens to them. We have like eugenics and all sorts of stuff on all sides of this. So I think there's a really dirty history of science and diversity that I'm really glad is being talked about more. And this is why diverse scientists matter, because they're making sure that people with a huge spectrum of backgrounds are part of the scientific process is what can prevent those horrible things from happening again. So science is not immune from bad decision making, just like science is not independent from politics. It's not independent from all of the negative trends that we see socially. So we have to deal with racism and sexism and xenophobia and ableism and privilege within the scientific community. It's a microcosm for the greater society. So I think the March for Science is really shining a light on these issues within science, which we need to deal with as a community. So it's a painful airing of some of our dirty laundry, but it's a really good time to be having these conversations.
We'll continue in a minute with marine biologist and March for Science organizer Ayana Elizabeth Johnson, live in the green space, 212-433-WNYC. Stay with us.
When James Foreman Jr. was a public defender, a black lawyer representing black defendants, he realized something about black police officers. They took the same lock-'em-up approach as white cops.
Black people should be able to be firefighters. We don't think they're going to change how we fight fires in America. I feel the same way about policing.
I'm Robert Siegel, locking up our own this afternoon on All Things Considered from NPR News.
Weekdays starting at 4 on WNYC.
WNYC support comes from Alkermes, the maker of Vivitrol, naltrexone for extended-release injectable suspension. More information available at Vivitrol.com. The New York Botanical Garden presenting Chihuly, works of art in glass, neon, and other media by artist Dale Chihuly, beginning April 22nd. Tickets at nybg.org. WNYC is a media partner for the New York Moth Story Slam, a storytelling competition featuring stories on the theme of fresh, tonight at Housing Works. Details at themoth.org.
WNYC, independent journalism in the public interest. 93.9 FM and AM 820. NPR News and the New York Conversation.
Brian Lehrer on WNYC, live in the green space today with our guest, Ayana Elizabeth Johnson, marine biologist and an organizer of Saturday's March for Science here in New York, a big one in Washington, and how many places around the world did you say?
514 and counting.
Yikes.
Official satellite marches.
That's a lot of math to go with the science. Let's take a question from here in the green space. Hi there.
Hi there. I'm wondering, how will you measure the success of the march? Because if you look at the Women's March, in terms of numbers, that was certainly a success, but what has it really led to, right? We heard earlier that, Planned Parenthood is slowly but surely being defunded. So, is it just a numbers game that if you get a lot of people, to rally in Washington, that's a success? And, isn't it in some ways just really a parade of supporters marching in front of themselves?
Marching in front of them, that one I haven't heard before. It's like an out-of-body experience. I think that's a really important question.
That, right?
Because you're absolutely right that if this ends with just a march, that's not success. But I think this is a really important moment for several reasons. One, it is a celebration of science and the value of science and starting to tell those stories. We'll have an amazing list of speakers that's being announced today who will be able to tell an incredible spectrum of stories about the different types of science that are happening and that are important to start to bring the public into these conversations. And the work that I've been doing with the March is I'm co-director of partnerships for the National March, which means I've been helping to build this coalition of 249, as of this morning, organizations and counting, who are partnering with us, not just for the March, but hopefully for the longer term. And that means that these are the organizations we'll be working with to improve scientific literacy, to bring science into communities and break down the wall between science and the public, to engage more in policy. We'll be releasing a policy platform sometime in the next week or two, talking about the specific areas of policy that we'd like to see changes or supported. So this is definitely, and it's also a moment for people who care about science to realize how many colleagues they have, how much support there is for all of this. So there's a lot of value in a march in creating cohesion, creating this coalition, and creating inertia to move things forward. So if we weren't having a march, I wouldn't be here on the radio right now. We wouldn't be talking about these issues. So we want to use this as an opportunity to bring a lot of things into the public discourse, into the zeitgeist, and keep it there for as long as we can, obviously. But in the long term, we definitely want this to keep going, and there's a lot of important work to do. One thing I would just mention that I was really excited to read about in the last few days was a Scientific Integrity Act has been introduced in both the House and the Senate. So Congress is thinking about what they need to do to engage and protect the role of science in federal policy making as well. So lots of work to be done over the next few days and months and years as well.
Let's take another question from here in the green space. Hi there.
Hi, I was just curious if you are involved with the Union for Concerned Scientists, if they're one of your partner groups, and do you think that's an effective organization for people who are not scientists to join and be supportive of what's going on right now?
Yes, the Union of Concerned Scientists was one of our first partners, and we're very excited to have their support. The name doesn't say it all, but it certainly says a lot. They are one of the organizations that worked really hard between the election and the inauguration to download and archive government data sets. So this was the thing that got me involved in the March for Science, that really opened my eyes to exactly how dire a situation we were in, that scientists were worried that government data sets on climate change, on endangered species, and on, were just going to disappear. And we're already starting to see things come down from government websites. So Union of Concerned Scientists helped with that archival process, and they're a wonderful partner to have. So I definitely encourage people to check out the resources on their website.
And as we run out of time, I see that you're partnering with various organizations here in New York for the New York edition of the March on Saturday. I see that starts at 10:30 Saturday morning at Central Park West and 62nd Street for those who are interested and who aren't going to the Washington March. And you have New York partners?
Yes, we do. As a marine biologist, I'm extremely excited that we have the New York Aquarium as a partner. And the Bronx Zoo, both run by the Wildlife Conservation Society. Our newest partner is the World Ocean Festival also, which is going to be happening in Gantry Park on June 3rd in tandem with the UN's Ocean Conference around their Sustainability Development Goal for that. So lots of exciting stuff happening in New York and all over. And please join us. You can go and find more at marchforscience.com, and you can RSVP at marchforscience.com/RSVP, #MarchForScience, @MarchForScienceDC. We have all the info you need. If you want to send it to friends who are in different cities, there's probably a march near them. But this is the first chance to stand up and be counted, and science, not silence, and all that good stuff.
And do you have a particular poignant hat that everybody's going to wear, like at the Women's March?
No hats required. I'm sure there'll be plenty of nerdy science jokes on signs that don't necessarily help to break down that barrier between science and society, but long game, we're working on our science communication skills.
I definitely have a crush on nerdy science jokes. And we'll have to put some on the air later in the week. And leave it there for now with Ayana Elizabeth Johnson, marine biologist, consultant, adjunct at NYU, currently the partnership's co-chair for the March.
NYU is actually a partner of the March.
Okay, March for Science, Saturday in Washington and 500 cities around the world, including New York. Dr. Johnson, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Science is real.